I'm sure you could continue discussions afterwards. It's time for the next speakers. It's going to be the turn right now for Charles Hall, which is professor at the University of Syracuse. And he's going to talk to something which is quite interesting for everybody, quite an interesting subject, which is energy return over investment. So let's try to keep on the schedule. Charles?
This is real. Go to the rest of the meeting. And I want to talk a little bit historically because there have been tremendous impacts of oil prices and supply on the economy in the past that are under-realized today. It's a general pattern. It's not something that's just happening now or will happen or something. First of all, we were warned, and I want to give credit to the people who understood this very well. Howard Odom, my doctoral advisor, M. King Hubbard, of course, and Jay Forrester, who actually wrote the Limits to Growth. Meadows just packaged it. And I'd like to say that I read Hubbard in 1969, and I did two things. First of all, I did not breed because of that. I said, when we go over the hump, it's going to be really tough. And the second thing is 1970, the first day I ever worked in my life, when they asked me what kind of retirement plan I wanted, the conservative TIAA and the stock market CREF. I said, well, when will I retire? And at that time, you had to retire at 65. And he said, about 2008, this year. And I said, put it all in the conservative. I want my money when I retire. And it was a very good decision now. So I understood this long ago. It's not new. All of these books were out there. And if you're young and you don't know these, or you're new to peak oil, this is not new. This is something that's been going on for a long time. We wrote a paper. Where's the laser thing? We wrote a paper in 1981 in Science that was called Petroleum Drilling and Production in the United States, Yield per Effort and Net Energy Analysis. And it just lays it all out right there. And history has gone just as we indicated. The next day I was on the first page of the Wall Street Journal. That was my 15 minutes of fame, and it was forgotten about after that. But we understood this. I got the cover issue of Science on this issue, another paper, Energy in the U.S. Economy, a Biophysical Perspective. That came out on the week in which I was denied tenure at Cornell University. And we had a book in 1986, which is often called the Energy Bible. It's all laid out. There's nothing new about what's going on now and what I will talk about. Hubbard made this prediction. His prediction is this line. For the lower 48, the green line is what actually happened. The red line is including Alaska. Hubbard said, I heard there might be some oil up there, but I don't know. So I'd say the predictions of these people were good. Hubbard did make a mistake in a way because he predicted a peak in conventional oil for the world in 2000. It did not exactly happen, but what happened is we had this 70s oil crisis, and this decreased oil growth. If we had kept growing, I penciled in what the growth might have been otherwise. I think we would be well past peak. It's only a depression or a recession that saved us from peak oil, and the recession today will save a little bit of oil for our children. So an economic depression from the perspective of oil for the future is a good thing. They made the limits to growth model. Probably most of you are familiar with this. This is the standard run. I hear this all the time, for example, at a recent-ish international meeting of all the geologists of the world in Oslo, that this model has failed. That is not true. The model predicted resources, food per capita, population, pollution, industrial output per capita, and so forth. And you see, you get into a whole lot of chaotic cows, I heard, chaotic behavior in this model. But one thing a lot of people didn't understand, that the technology, the mistake they made here is they didn't put years in between 1900 and 2100, which I did with a ruler and a pencil. And so we're about here. And as of 2008, it's a little arbitrary. What's resources, oil and gas? Well, we're half or a third of the way through that. Population estimate is almost exactly right. Pollution, certainly CO2, little over a high estimate for SOx and NOx, but for most of the pollutants, we're pretty much right on. Food per capita, according to Harris, is still increasing. Industrial output per capita certainly was increasing, at least into the last month. So this is a damn good predictor. It is not a model that's failed. It may not be right, but it is not a model that's failed. And all kinds of people say that it is a model that's failed. So I want to pay tribute to these people who came long before and laid it all out for me. It was just damn obvious. Colin Campbell, we want to give him credit for predicting the fact that increase in the price of oil would lead to financial instability, which would lead to an undulating plateau. And I think that we're seeing that. We can't say oil is exactly the cause, but it certainly has something to do with it. I'll come back to that. Now, I want to tell you why the economists got it wrong. This is what really gets me upset, that the economists have had incredible arrogance, and they've been incredibly wrong. And I just want to show you some of the few ways. And incidentally, just before we came here, we had a meeting of a new society called the Society of Biophysical Economics. If you're interested in it, write that on the back of a card and give it to me. Or if you're interested in being on my energy listserv, do that too. Now, the thing is that they don't take into consideration that it's only been the fact that we could pump more oil out of the ground to make any economic system work. Communism worked for a long time, still does in some places. Capitalism worked, all kinds of things worked. But it isn't working because the economic theories are terrifically insightful. They work because we pump oil out of the ground to make it work. Well, there you have it. Tell me the fairy tale about the economy. So our first question is, what is economics? Well, we all know the answer. Economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. That's what the economists say. And their model, and they say wealth comes from capital investments, used to have labor in the equation. And this is their basic equation in chapter 1 of all economic textbook. That's ridiculous. There are at least 3 things wrong with this picture. The boundaries are wrong. It has no thermodynamics, which is impossible. And it actually has not been explicitly tested. Economics textbooks don't put forth hypotheses and test them. It's just a given. It's no different from going to church. You believe or you don't. And where we have tested economic theories, almost always we find they don't work, and I'll give you just a few examples. A much better definition of economics comes from Polanyi, who says economics is a study of how people transform nature to meet their needs. And also, unfortunately, their wants, their manipulated needs, but it comes from nature. Economics is about nature, it's about stuff. So I just said this, incorrect boundaries doesn't meet thermodynamics, and it's articles of faith rather than science. Economics is not a science. It's called a social science. It's not a science. The basic ideas are not put forth as hypotheses and tested. It just doesn't happen. This is the biophysical model of the economy. It may look a little bit complicated, but let me walk you through it. Real economies work this way, and this is the biophysical model. You have to start with the energy sources in nature, sun, geothermal, nuclear, whatever, and raw materials. So the most important part of the economy is the proper functioning of the hydrologic cycle. But an economist doesn't deal with that because it doesn't enter the market. What crap. It's just wrong. And so we have to look at what is really happening in ecosystems. So I'm trained as a systems ecologist, but I think of economies as ecosystems because that's what they are. And so here's the process. Humans come in like any other species, and they exploit nature cut down the forest, put in cows or farms, dams, oil wells, dig stuff out of the ground. They process it, butcher block, a sawmill, a refinery, and so forth. They manufacture stuff. It's a kind of food chain. It's a kind of ecological food chain with energy loss at each step, materials going through up until we get to the top consumer, which is us. And so here's consumption. This is where neoclassical economics focuses. And you see energy in the light arrows and material in the dark arrows go all the way through this system until they end up in the waste heap. That's how economies really work. And I maintain that this is the minimum diagram that we can use in our introductory economic textbooks to teach our young people how economics really works. And so I'm interested in what this means relative to what's going on in the world, what will go on with peak oil. Now let me just give you an example. This is how economists look at the US economy in 1990 for one person. Capital input is 3,000, whoop-de-doo. Labor is 2,000 hours, and GDP output is $23,000. That's the economy. In fact, this is the economy. Per person, 2,500 kilograms of oil, 3,000 of coal, 2,000 of gas, and then all this other stuff, 140,000 of water, wood, other metals, soil, and this is the also output CO2, SOx, NOx. It's an ecosystem. That's what an economy is. And we have to study it this way, and we have to throw out those SOBs who tell you the economy is anything else. For example, here's another example where they absolutely have it wrong. They say, this is how a production function, this is how stuff is made. And it's a function of capital and labor. And of course, this explains only about 50% of the increase in production in economies over time. There's 50% that's unexplained, and so Dennison and others call this a residual that's due to innovation, to the human invention and so forth. Well, in fact, when you put in energy into the equation, which was missing, then you have no residual. Here's an example. And incidentally, I have papers with, these are all published, and I have some with me, so if you're interested. So why the hell don't the economists talk about this? We publish all this stuff, and they ignore us. And that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Here's another way where they're completely wrong. They say markets will solve resource scarcity. Well, here in the U.S. is the production of oil and gas over time from 1950 to today. This is the production, and here's drilling. Initially, it makes sense. You drill more, you produce more oil and gas. But then we drill less for a dozen years, and we produce more. And then we hit Hubbard's peak, and then the price went way up, and we increased our drilling by a factor of 4. But it didn't make any difference. No difference. The market didn't do what it's supposed to do at all, not one tiny bit. And it doesn't do that now. So the drilling is increased again, and the production is falling. We are testing whether empirically the introduction of free markets and neoclass economics and so forth bring us efficiency. Remember, markets are supposed to bring us efficiency. If you believe that, let me introduce you to my friend the Easter Bunny. So we have, for 170 countries, we have some like the United States, where efficiency, the yellow line is really what you want to do. It's with and without a quality correction, is increasing. So Canada, US, France, Sweden, Netherlands, the more industrial countries, that seems to be the case, and some other quite different countries. Most countries, perhaps, are flat or really jagged. Spain is an example. No real change in efficiency over time. That is, the efficiency defined as economic production over energy input. Bangladesh and Bolivia, El Salvador, Portugal, Iran, efficiency is decreasing. More are decreasing than increasing. So much for markets increasing efficiency. Another lie from economics. And boy, do they believe this. So why should economics be a social science since it is mostly about biophysical stuff? Why have we left it to the social scientists? Where are the physicists? Where are the ecologists? I think that all of human activity is basically based on, all of quote-unquote human progress is based on energy, and even here's some, we've seen some cave people before, here's some more, and they're saying, and now there go the Wilsons, seem like everybody's evolving except us. But the Wilson have a spear point, which is an energy concentration device, and they have fire. It's about energy, as in its agriculture and everything we do today. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the stock market, so it's so much in the news. This is debt in the United States before. I can't keep up with this stuff. This was before 2 weeks ago. So we really have a lot of serious debt. I have no idea how we'll pay that back. We'll just do it like in Germany. You've seen the pictures with people going to the store to get a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of their life savings and marks. Well, perhaps that will happen. I don't know. GDP growth and oil production growth have tracked for decades, more or less. Not perfectly. So what is going on with Wall Street? I'd like to show you a little movie, if this works, which will tell you what's going on in Wall Street. Just lovely. Well, there you have it. They're trying to throw me out of here already, but they told me I had 10 minutes, and I'm going to take they told me I had half an hour, which I'm going to use. But I'm getting there. So what's going on? This is the view of Wall Street now. The Dow Jones, this is before the last month. It's now you're losing your shirt. So what's going on? Hypothesis 1. God is intervening. Hypothesis 2, they were just a bunch of greedy, dirty SOBs. I've got the pre-bleeped one with me too. I like this. Capitalism is and was just a giant government-endorsed Ponzi scheme. You know, chain letters. And it was all based on the growth of oil. When you stop the growth of oil, the Ponzi scheme doesn't work anymore. The people at the bottom are screwed like they are in all the Ponzi schemes. The guys at the top get the golden parachutes based on the fact that they were there on this part of the oil curve. So I decided to try it, and this is what happens. If this is true, that no oil, no economic growth. But you notice this guy, that's technological advance, he has a bow and arrow. Hypothesis 4, peak oil, did that cause this or not? So the stock market sort of grew like this. This is what I thought. And then kept growing because they expect 3% a year growth. And then it didn't happen. And so they had to crash down to that. So I tried to test this empirically, and I don't know if it's the best test, but I think something like this is. And this is the Dow, first of all, this is the Dow Jones corrected for inflation. You have to correct the Dow, it's just prices, you have to correct it for inflation. And this is the use of energy in the United States, which presumably generates the, whatever it is the Dow Jones is supposed to track. Now everybody will say the Dow Jones is psychological, and it is. And that's why you're above or below this tracking, but I think we're coming back towards it again. So I'm just very interested in whether or not ultimately the Dow Jones has to be constrained by this. The question is not how much oil is in the ground, but how much we can get out with an energy profit, and I have a graph out there that since I don't have much time, I won't talk about it. I just started with this energy return on investment idea, studying migrating fish. How much energy does a fish use to migrate? And how much does it gain from being in different ecosystems at different times? So I derived the idea of energy return on investment, and that this is a graph that was actually published in 1981, that you're getting less and less per foot drilled, and the cost of drilling a foot is going more and more until they get even. Let me just give you an example. We argue in the United States a lot about the energy return on investment of corn-based ethanol, and is it 0.8, as Pimentel says, or a little bit more, as some other people say. This is really how to look at it. It's the same data, but the scale, this is 1.6, and this is 50. This is real fuels are up here. They're not down here. It's a joke. And that's why most biofuels are a joke. And we can go on about that some more. The energy return on investment for all kinds of fuels, this is Canadian natural gas, are dropping like a stone. It's going to make it real hard to get out of the situation. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't have time. There's a poster out there, but just to show you that this is the quality of energy determined by energy return on investment. This is the quantity over time. In the U.S., oil went from 100 return for one invested, 100 calories return per calorie invested, or barrels per barrel, to 30 when we first started studying it, to probably around 10 today. And we can look at all of our other fuels that way. And why haven't we done this for Europe? Why haven't we done this for all the fuels you're talking about? Most of the fuels I hear talked about in this, why we're getting African gas, because it's got high EROI. And so we have to look very carefully at our solar options, at our other options. What's their EROI? What's the main implications of decreasing energy return on investment? I think the main thing will be a decrease in discretionary spending. And we look at this, the energy we paid for how much, what percentage of our budget, that's 14% in 1980, that we pay for energy, and we started up here again, but I don't think we're going to get as high. What's happening with the peak oil now is not as important as what happened in 1970. So let's look in the future, and here's the main thing, the main takeaway idea. GDP, 100% here. This is our cheese slicer model. The economy generates cheese. It comes out here. It's sliced into investments, consumption, and of the investments, it goes to energy. And the relation between the blue and the black is the EROI. It goes into infrastructure maintenance, and it goes into discretionary spending. You have to invest in energy or you have no economy. And then what's left is consumption, either staples to pay for the people or discretionary. And so if you look at it over time, here's 1970, it's about the same thing. This is just data. 1981, you notice it's gone, look at the blue and the red at the top. The investments into energy by 1981 were a lot more, and the discretionary investments were a lot less. See on the top? And so the EROI has large implications on your discretionary spending. 1990, 2007, we're pretty much back cruising along. The economy expands, and that's a lot of the reason that we got in this housing mess, because people thought they had more money than they did when the price of oil started going up. But look into the future. This is modeling into the future. If the EROI declines, and I see no reason it won't, then you have to, this blue arrow has to become bigger and bigger. You still have to maintain your infrastructure, your bridges fall into the Mississippi River, and your discretionary starts getting squeezed more and more. And if you go into the future, discretionary spending almost disappears. And I see this, I go by this cruise ship out there. Wait, get serious. Those things get 1 foot per gallon. How long are we going to be doing that, you know? I don't think it's a cycle, it's a trend. Doesn't have to be a bad thing. We need to live on interest, not capital. And we have to think new ways about economics. We have to reduce labor productivity. Labor productivity is terrible because it puts people out of work. And it replaces people with fuel. You get high labor productivity by giving them more fuel. We'll have to reduce wages. It will impact foreign workers hugely. I'm really sorry about that. We cannot afford market economics to guide our future, and it's a great time to think about redistribution. Got to think about that real hard. My final professional goal is to push this rock of neoclassical, this fairy tale of neoclassical economics off the cliff, and I thank you. Where's my chair? Stop, no chair.
Your chair is here.
If you plot the two, they both peak around 1971, and I think if it's in $2,000, $2,000 for the number of dollars per hour, the federal minimum wage in the U.S. If you have it normalized to 2,000, I think you find the numbers match almost exactly. Millions of barrels a day of oil production and federal minimum wage in dollars per hour. Yeah, I wonder why. Thank you.
GDP with inflation, but what you are using, obviously, the official inflation, but if you look at some of the shadow statistics, the real inflation, for example, in 1980 is about twice more than it is officially thing. So if have you try to use real inflation, not the official one?
That's another way the governments lie to us, is that their inflation numbers are that's another way all of this is tangled. It's worse than we think because the official government inflation rates, they lie in many ways. And a huge problem in the U.S. is that we used to get data in terms of energy. The Department of Commerce used to do a great job maintaining energy. You ready? Data, but the data is increasingly crap.